Okay, I think we're good to go, yeah. So thanks, Ernest. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our much anticipated, I think, session on software-defined security services. For the next half hour, we're going to be updating you all on what we've been up to since ONUG fall at NYU. And thanks to Nick for giving us 30 minutes to deal with this little insignificant subject of such small consequence. Well, I figured, that you knew how much I like to talk, so that you were bookending that. Smart idea. Joining me today are my colleagues from the working group, or a subset of them, Messrs. Burns, Lima, Lucy, and Woodward, and I'll let each of you say a few things about yourself and introduce yourselves to the folks. Mark, you want to start?
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Ward. I'm CTO at vArmor. I guess I'm the only vendor up here. But before vArmor, I was CTO for networking and telecoms at Goldman Sachs.
I'm David Lucy, network architect at Salesforce and network applied research. It's my job to poke things with sticks.
And he's proving the point that people with facial hair really are intellectually superior, and you really can't even think about having a ZZ Top tribute band without David Lucy on board, right? Yeah, I'm working on growing mine back, I guess. Thanks, Fred.
Everybody, Fred Lima with Visa Security Architecture.
And I'm John Burns, Principal Network Architect at Wells Fargo, and I hang out with security guys all the time, so I'm as paranoid as you can imagine now. I used to be a just open, positive guy. Security guys got a hold of me.
We'll see what we can do at the reception. So before us now, we have a rather daunting list of folks. In terms of the broader membership of the Security Services Working Group, here's the entire crew that helped with the heavy lifting. Without them, obviously, we wouldn't have made the progress that we did. As you can see, it's a fairly good-sized group with, I think, really strong representation from across the operating community first, and then second, several months into our effort, starting last January or February or so, we had a key group of vendors join us. Thanks for everyone's contributions here to the working group effort. As Nick pointed out to me, there was too many words on this slide, and I managed to add a few more before I was done. I'm not going to read this. This is basically, sort of the archival update on the journey we've been on. I do want to point out a few things that are critical. First of all, it's not up there. The biggest thing we did was, besides reconvening and recalibrating and sort of reinvigorating the group after a bit of a rocky start last summer fall, we actually succeeded in publishing a 20 or so page white paper on the subject, and believe that is or will be soon available on the website. Yep. Okay. So I would really wish that there was some way I could put that on a thumb drive and insert it into the USB connection behind your ear and download it to you immediately, because really the heart and soul of what this group did is reflected in that white paper, and the if you want to call it the logic and the argumentation is all right there. But few key things to pull out of it, and we'll get on to our conceptual framework. Two design principles really animated, at the end of the day, the use cases that we developed, and I think the requirements that came out of those use cases. The first one, software-defined infrastructure must possess a common language to define declaratives and policies, as we say here, that can be consumed up and down the IT stack, physically and virtually. I don't think that's controversial or objectionable. And by the way, we want to make this, even though we've only got half an hour, we want to make this interactive. Don't want to miss any questions that you might have. So if something's germane to what we're talking about, I'm not going to talk about the Red Sox, but anything else that pops up, please do shout out. and we'll try to keep the chaos to a minimum. The second thing is software-defined infrastructure must be able to instantiate an internet-facing workload in a software-defined data center so that it provides protection equivalent to today's physically isolated networks. So we felt very strongly that that was a key imperative, if you will, a key design principle.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, that's kind of, if you said, what are you trying to produce? The ultimate use case, I'll bet everyone here has some workload that you care and feed for. It's so sensitive, it has to be physically isolated, can't be put in a cloud, whatever, even if it's in the cloud, it's specially built, right? And then people can review it and satisfy themselves that it's secure, right? And we really need to be able to fully abstract that, where I go, yeah, it's secure because the little padlock form, just like, and we all trust HTTPS, right? I know I have a secure session because the padlock shows up, and that's attesting to a whole bunch of things that I don't see. So how can I take whatever would be the most sensitive thing, the thing you say is the crown jewels of my company, and deploy it in a manner where all the security is being provided in a software-defined manner, and yet I'm just as confident as if I had physical isolated firewalls and security review teams and every layer of control manually put out there. To me, that's kind of the ultimate case. If you can do that, that's what we need. That's what we lack today. We do too much custom engineering for
Absolutely.
security reasons.
Okay, thank you. So what this all boiled down to was we ended up considering a number of use cases. 9 of them floated to the surface, if you will. 3 of them were selected for initial development. Emphasis on initial, because I don't know if you're ever done with security. And together they focused really on 4 main areas. Only 3 of them are listed here. But first of all, the notion of workload integrity. We'll get into that in our diagram. Security policy portability. Enforcement and verification. And from those use cases, which we see on this next slide, we actually get down from the 9 to the 3 that we selected. I don't think there's a whole lot of point in spending time that we don't have on the 6 use cases that didn't make the cut. Let's go through the use cases that we did select. Fred, you were the author of use case, what became known as use case number 8, the notion that security policies should be bound to workloads, no matter what their genesis. So do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Sure. The paradigm we've been living for a long time in security space is the idea that we have those constructs that are static and don't change much. Once things got virtualized, that really didn't change a lot, because the application architecture still required those tiers that we are very much used to. The mobility aspect of the workloads were there, but it's still under control to some extent. So you could make the assumption that the security policies and the security controls could pretty much be architected in a similar manner as it has been for quite some time. But then all of a sudden the paradigm of soft-defined comes to play, and the applications start to be re-architected, and mobility becomes a key paradigm shift for us to deal with. How can we dynamically follow a workload with the policy that's applicable to that workload if I remain with the static bound type of controls, regardless of being physical or virtual. So in a way, we can think also of security controls being tied to the network topology very closely. And all of a sudden, we realize that, hey, that's not scaling too well, because the application constructs are scaling out in a way that's independent of the network topology. So how can we possibly define a policy framework which is bound to the workload, regardless of that workload being, again, a virtual machine, container, or whatnot. So what we feel is that, and that was a consensus among the folks in the working group, is that there is a need for us to drive towards that direction, knowing that we have several challenges And the one thing I like about what's been said here over the past couple of days is some of the paradigms that everybody's living with. So there is a developer-centric environment these days, and the developer, to some extent, making some calls on whatever container orchestration engine they want to use, and think about dealing with all different types of container orchestration engines. And all of a sudden, from a security perspective, you start to think, wait a minute, how can I maintain consistency in policies if all those different control planes come to play? It becomes a challenge. And so right off the bat, if we can agree that at the data plane level, we can drive consistency at the enforcement layer, then we're going to be better off as we try to figure out all the madness, if you will, that's going on at the control plane layer. And that, to us, that means that binding the security policies to the workload is the way to go.
And for me, I think for a lot of people in the group, that was really a breakthrough point when we started articulating the central challenge, because this is such a big subject to get your hands around. And so for me, the next two really flowed from number 8. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Just a quick,
Yeah.
I guess a comment, but
Yeah.
it seems to me like you should have combined 8 and 9.
Well, we, yeah, fair enough.
You're gonna see that in the white paper, actually, 8 and 9 combined.
Yeah, they end up having the same shared set of requirements.
And then it seems, once you can attest, which
Is the idea of how
your number 4,
the
once you can
control
attest to
plane-
Yep,
everything else,
yeah.
this is
So
a
we
huge
have
thing. So
this
part of
idea
what
that
you have
the
in
control
here
plane also is a
is the ability to be open about how you
So
program.
this chart is like network state
And I'm
down.
interested to know if you work with any of
In
the
this network
any of the
are
security
the
vendors
actual
to make sure
network,
that they
the
will be
base
open
stations are the
for programming the policy.
And-
That's really what they're asking for.
Well,
Write the policy in English somewhere.
For
Yeah,
example,
that-
we don't install
Scan into the firewall.
now that we've articulated the requirements, that's the next step, right? To go ahead.
What about
kind of coordination that's happening in this control plane. Unlike the state controller, there's not global coordination.
storage as well as
My base station is coordinate with the one most of the base station. Because it doesn't matter what it is, it's one
Good point. I don't know if someone wants to take that, but I think we should jump to the conceptual framework so that we can actually see what this looks like. Can you jump ahead? Yeah.
Could I just jump in for
Yeah, sure, of
for
course.
1 second? One thing I would say, which hasn't been mentioned, is all of these use cases were put together by users, and vendors weren't involved. But the way I interpret number 8 is that I wouldn't constrain it just to mobility. I'd also broaden it to auto scaling and the ability to spin up, like instances of the same application. And you can think about it at the workload level, but also I think you need to think about it at the application process level, because that's kind of like the unit of granularity. And I think that the policy associated with the workload breaks down into a couple of other things depending on how many processes are running. And that's really important.
Yeah, quite a bit of, we've seen a few buzzwords coming up over the past couple of years. Zero trust model, microsegmentation, all those good things. But the reality is about us understanding that the trust boundary is moving. Yeah. As we get into the new space, it's also the case in the control plane. So as the trust boundaries are moving, how can we make sure that the policies follow along? So that's a paradigm we're dealing with.
So I think it's at this point appropriate to move to the conceptual framework. 8 and 9, point well made. Yeah, it was a test. But we honestly, this was a work in real time, and that's really how they emerged. And it was later on that we realized that they were fairly combinable. So you'll see here we really see, for all intents and purposes, from a conceptual framework standpoint, we really see no difference between private cloud, and hybrid cloud. We see at the heart of the matter, we see the workload, and we see the security policy wrapped at the workload or very close to the workload. We take a slightly more nuanced approach in the white paper on that. This makes it look maybe completely absolute. But as with all conceptual models, there's a little bit of wiggle room here. So there's 4 takeaways here, right? Security policy should be bound to workloads, as we just said, independent of their creation and location. And importantly, those policies should be portable, specifically centrally deployed, centrally defined, and then deployed to multiple locales. Enforcement should be at or close to the workload itself. And the critical point that came out in use case number 4 around the security triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability needs to be actually ensured also at that local level. So you must be able to ensure, you must be able to verify, audit and verify the CIA of the workload. So this is really kind of what it all boiled down to in the end. And we have the requirements as the next slide, but I thought we'd take a minute and talk about this and get your responses and see how this spaghetti sticks on the wall.
Yeah, a couple comments I just make, particularly if you're looking at this from a developer's eye or an academic eye, what's the problem I'm trying to solve, or what are some of these challenges? One would be, if you want the policy as close to the workload as possible, how do you orchestrate that? Are there computations that can figure that out, algorithms that can decide, oh yes, this is as close as I can get? You probably can't always put every policy enforcement directly at every workload. Maybe some enforcement mechanisms need to be centralized for efficiency, for licensing, whatever. So how do you construct that service chain? How do you know you have the right order? There's some good problems to work on that. All the horizontal arrows there that are implying a trusted control channel, that may not scale today either. If you're saying I need a TLS certificate for every policy enforcement point, I now have 10,000 virtual firewalls. Can I really scale and manage that? So there may be something about scaling cryptography or trust associations that needs to be worked out. And then federating, is this really one instance of the control plane that would be across both a public and a private or a hybrid cloud, or is that a federation between 2? And if so, do they agree on the levels of capability? Can Amazon do the same thing as the Palo Alto firewall I have in my data center? Do we have some language to describe levels of functionality, and they can say, yes, I'm doing the equivalent? So how do we come up with these sort of levels of security and equivalencies across domains? So those are some of the technical challenges, I think, to work through.
One thing that isn't pointed out here explicitly, but was intended, we should have put a label in, is that these are all meant to be trusted boundaries, right? So it's not like this is perimeter security and magically everything inside is secure, right? That's understood, I hope. Okay. You guys must have more than that.
I assume that the use case you have in the cloud version is use case, right? Or,
That would be at least one of them for that is first thing.
any other ones that you have set in mind there?
Well, we initially debated what was more important, public, private, or both, and we actually put that as a vote to the group at the last session. And there were more people that said, please solve it for private first. If you have to prioritize, we want it solved for both, but we think private takes precedence because maybe there's more pain felt there, more people just have that situation. So we tend to articulate a lot of them starting with that private model of I have more control over the infrastructure and the solutions I can use, but we always say extend it to a public model where you have maybe less direct control, but you can still set all the same policies. How would you do that same thing? So anyone want to expand on that?
Well, we all know private's better anyway, right? I mean, now after yesterday.
Yeah, I think if you start with proving that you can migrate and you can scale and all the things that you need to do, and you can wrap the workload with security controls in one of these environments, private or public, then you kind of, the next step is to work out how you do it across hybrid. I think that's the ultimate goal. I think we're addressing functional outcomes right now. So we're trying to define the functional outcomes, and then against that, the team will test the different technology approaches.
Yeah, it's for those who haven't had the opportunity yet to work in a working group, and I would recommend it because I think it's really where you come to grips with what we're trying to accomplish here in a very real way. You quickly learn that there's this thing called the problem space, and there's this thing called the solution space, for lack of better phrases, and really requirements are very much in the problem space, the what, as opposed to the how, which is where the vendors come in and do magic things for us, right?
Right, maybe that's the segue to the next slide then, which is to get some voting on, okay, so what are the priorities that people want to see dealt with?
Thank you, John. That was good. Okay, so yeah, the 10 requirements. There's a lot of words here. Should we read them? Or do we? Yes, let's summarize. Good idea, Nick. Number 1, policy enforcement, common across physical or virtual infrastructure. We thought that was the easy one. Number 2, service chaining. A notion that's gotten a lot of attention over the last few years. I don't know if everyone's familiar with the term, but basically disaggregation, virtualization of services that may have been combined in some appliance like a firewall, NATing, DPI, AC on a firewall. Can you move those off to commodity devices and handle those workloads separately? Gets interesting. We decided that we would use the word must be supported. Policy enforcement, again, at the nearest location to the workload. Policy enforcement mechanism integrated with the infrastructure where the workload resides. You might be able to argue that those two could be combined as well. Then the notion that an authorized subject, so an agent, an administrator, must be able to issue protection profile and protection state request queries to a system operating on the network. What's the state? To the which one of our other working groups is focused on. Big subject. But being able to understand that state, understand the context, verify it, and so on. Need open interfaces for management and control. Need to be able to enable filtering, ACLs, stateful policies, path isolation for workload-bound traffic. Need to be able to integrate back-end with policy management enforcement engines, again, via open and secure APIs. Must be able to guarantee the operational performance of each protection, of each, I'm not sure if that's written properly. System operating on the network must be able to guarantee the operational performance of each protection it claims to provide. Thank you. You have to read the whole sentence. And then, again, policy enforcement being a portable matter. Okay, so that's a lot to digest, I know. So please. I forgot that. Thank you. But it is, and we did it in less than 30 minutes, just to prove to Nick that it could be done. Yeah.
And again, you're seeing how the group model works. So this came from all the working group members saying, "Oh, here's the thing I care about. Here's the thing I care about." So now we put it out to the larger community and say, "Okay, give us your prioritized order." Right, and that's the things that we'll then look to the solution community to develop and say these are the ones that would get the most adoption by customers, the pain points that if you can solve this, you'll probably see the most revenue is really what it translates to. So this is your chance to influence. And if you're going, hey, the one that I want isn't up there, please join the working group.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that pitch. We're always looking for working group contributors. You know, and no offense to our vendor friends, but we're also always looking for executives, IT people, and real end user communities, because frankly, that's where the rubber hits the road, and this is an end user driven group, and we can always use more support. So.
I have to say, having spent many years involved with open standards, it is very refreshing to have the requirements set by the user community. It's good, and to have them laid out.
Your check's in the mail.
Yeah, well, and helping us to think about what are the correct open APIs and data models and those things is very difficult if you're in a vendor on your own to define that, because the marketplace is competitive. That kind of guidance coming from you guys is really important.
And as the guy who provided my dinner last night, I can say that we appreciate your perspective on that and are happy to have you on board. We have a question in the back.
Now you spoil it.
Within the working group, and so now
it's happening right now. This is real time. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. For those who haven't been through it before, there's the sort of the initial voting that happens within the working group to establish the order and the priority and so on, so that we can try to present something coherent to you.
Yeah, so for example, if...
Of course.
Okay, great. Yeah, so for example, like on the first, I think there are like 9 or so use cases, we boil those down to 3, and the way we did that was really the community voted, the working group voted. So Fred's one around kind of tying policy and security around the workloads. That was just the entire group saying, yeah, that's one of the most important things that we should be focusing on. And then so did the other 2 that followed from that as well. So, like Mark said, this was all driven by IT execs focusing on how do we basically fix security as we enter into this software-defined infrastructure world. So the white paper is on the ONUG website as well. So we want everyone to kind of download that, focus on it, and then also to Tim's question earlier. Yeah, this is we want everyone who is putting out RFPs. If you believe that these are the things that you really need, put them into your RFPs. Talk to all the vendors that are out there in the marketplace so that you get these requirements and they hear these requirements over and over and over again across the broad sector of the industry.
Okay. And just related to that, for those of you who don't like voting online, how many people still have little blue stickers on the back of your ID? They're supposed to go on the boards over there. So if you haven't done that yet, time is getting short. Go put your stickers on the board for ideas over there that you want to prioritize.
I want to make a comment, just another comment on number 4, the CIA. So I think one expectation is that the vendor community is supposed to understand the risk appetite of their client base. So when we think about CIA for a network workload, say a virtual firewall is an example, and the idea that you want to be able to maintain and provide attestation of the integrity of that virtualized network function. There may be different clients that have a different risk appetite in how you want to anchor your attestation to a root of trust that may differ depending on the deployment model, depending on the client, and so on. So. It's one thing that I would encourage everybody to keep in mind.
So we have this interesting situation where we have 2 clocks in this room, and they tell different times. So I'm going to the atomic source.
All right, just give you the hook.
3:14, buddy. It's pushy fidelity, guys. Okay, so thanks all for coming. Thanks for listening. Please participate in the working group. And as the president said last week, Obama out.